She signed a 90-day marriage contract with Millionaire CEO, but one kiss broke the rules. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had just stopped in New York City, leaving the pavement shining under the streetlights like liquid glass. Inside a towering skyscraper on Fifth Avenue, a man in a tailored black suit sat behind a mahogany desk. His name was Alexander Kane, a 32-year-old millionaire CEO whose empire stretched from real estate to finance. Cold, precise, and ruthless in the boardroom, Alexander was known to treat business deals like battlefields. No feelings, no mercy, only results. Tonight, however, the deal waiting on his desk was unlike any other. It was not a merger, it was not a corporate acquisition. It was a marriage contract, 90 days, signed and sealed. A marriage designed to protect his family's legacy, silence the board of directors, and keep greedy rivals from tearing apart everything he had built. Across from him sat a young woman clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her name was Emma Hayes, 24 years old, a waitress from Queens. Her world was a far cry from Alexander's penthouses and boardrooms. She worked double shifts in a downtown diner, wore secondhand shoes, and carried the weight of hospital bills for her mother's failing health. When the chance came to save her mother, even if it meant signing away 90 days of her life to a man who barely looked at her, she took it. "Read every clause carefully," Alexander said, sliding the thick contract across the desk. His voice was cool, almost mechanical. "This is a business arrangement, Miss Hayes. Do not mistake it for anything else." Emma's eyes scanned the pages. No intimacy, no public affection unless required, no involvement in personal affairs. 90 days together in his mansion, acting as his wife before the press and his family. After that, she would walk away with a generous settlement money that could buy her mother's treatment. Money that could change her entire life. Her heart pounded as she signed her name. She felt as if she was handing away her freedom with each stroke of the pen. When she looked up, Alexander had already turned to his assistant, giving orders for a press announcement of their sudden marriage. To him, she was just another contract to manage. Another problem solved. But to Emma, this was the beginning of a nightmare wrapped in silk and marble. She stepped into his world of wealth, only to feel every gaze burn her with silent judgment. At the engagement dinner arranged by his board, she heard the whispers. "She is not his type. She looks like a charity case. He could have anyone, and he chose her." Emma lowered her eyes, but she did not break. She held her chin high, even when the champagne glasses clinked in mocking laughter. Alexander remained silent, never once defending her, never once softening the icy mask he wore. Yet when their eyes met across the table, for the briefest second, something flickered: curiosity, or perhaps annoyance at how unshaken she seemed by the cruelty of his world. That night, in the grand mansion where every chandelier sparkled like stars, Emma unpacked her small suitcase in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment. She touched the silk sheets, the marble floors, the golden-framed mirrors, but none of it made her feel rich. Instead, she felt smaller, like an outsider trespassing where she did not belong. She whispered to herself, 90 days, Emma. Just 90 days. Then freedom. Little did she know, one kiss, one mistake, one moment would burn the contract to ashes and rewrite both of their lives forever. The first morning after signing the contract felt nothing like the fairy tales Emma had once secretly dreamed about as a girl. The sun streamed through the tall glass windows of the mansion, but the warmth did not reach her. She woke to silence, not to a partner's greeting, not to breakfast together, but to the distant hum of servants already working. Her room, although designed to impress, felt colder than the tiny apartment she had left behind. At the dining table, a long stretch of polished wood separated her from Alexander Kane. He sat at the far end, reading financial reports while sipping black coffee. He did not look up when Emma entered. A maid placed a plate in front of her: eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, but her appetite vanished. Alexander finally spoke, his voice flat and firm. "Rule number 3, Miss Hayes. No unnecessary conversation, unless in public appearances. Remember that. Emma clenched her fork, the sting of humiliation mixing with quiet anger. She wanted to remind him that she was not just a pawn in his game, but she swallowed the words. 90 days. She could endure 90 days. Later that afternoon, Emma followed Alexander to a charity gala hosted by his company. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and sequins, filled with polished laughter and clinking champagne glasses. Cameras flashed the moment they entered arm in arm. Emma had borrowed a gown from his wardrobe department, a silver dress that fit her awkwardly yet carried an unexpected grace. "Smile," Alexander whispered through gritted teeth. "The press is watching." She obeyed, her lips curving into a practiced smile. But the whispers soon began. "She is too plain. She does not belong here. She must have done something desperate to catch him." Emma kept her eyes forward, even as heat burned in her cheeks. For a moment, she wondered if this humiliation was worth the money that would pay her mother's bills. Halfway through the evening, Alexander's former fiancée appeared. Victoria, tall and flawless, walked toward them with the confidence of a queen reclaiming her throne. Her voice carried a subtle edge as she said, "Alexander, what an unexpected choice you have made." The crowd leaned in, hungry for drama. Emma felt every eye on her, expecting her to falter, to crumble under the weight of comparison. But instead, she lifted her chin, looked Victoria in the eye, and calmly replied, "Sometimes the unexpected choice is the right one." For the first time that night, Alexander looked at her not as a contract bride, not as a nuisance, but as a woman who refused to bow to scorn. Something flickered in his gaze, quickly hidden behind his mask of indifference. Back at the mansion, the silence between them was heavier than before. Emma sat by the window, staring at the city lights, replaying every whispered insult in her head. Alexander stood near the door, loosening his tie. He finally broke the silence. "You handled yourself well tonight. Better than I expected." Emma did not turn. Her voice was steady, though her heart still raced. "I may not belong in your world, Mr. Kane, but do not mistake me for someone who cannot survive it." "Oh." Alexander studied her for a long moment. He almost said something more, but instead walked away, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. That night, Emma realized that the 90-day contract was more than an arrangement. It was a battlefield of pride, dignity, and unspoken truths. Every gala, every dinner, every public event would test her resolve. And though she told herself she was only enduring this for her mother's sake, deep inside she knew this story was no longer just about survival. Somewhere between his cold commands and her quiet strength, a dangerous shift was beginning. The contract said no love. But already, invisible cracks were forming. The days that followed became a test of patience for Emma. She had expected awkward silence, but she had not imagined how exhausting it would be to live in a house where every step echoed, and every glance from Alexander was a reminder of her outsider status. Yet she refused to let herself shrink. She took comfort in small acts, brewing her own coffee in the massive kitchen, tending to the neglected flowers on the balcony, or quietly reading by the fireplace when the mansion turned too quiet. One evening, Alexander returned late from a meeting. He found Emma in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, standing over a pot of homemade soup. The smell of chicken broth and herbs filled the air, so out of place in a mansion, accustomed to catered meals. "You do not have to cook," Alexander said, loosening his cufflinks as his gaze lingered on her. "There are staff for that." Emma did not look up. "I know, but I am not cooking for them. I am cooking for me. For once, I want to feel normal in this place." Her words, simple and unpolished, hung in the air. Alexander did not respond. He sat down, almost against his will, and tasted the soup. The warmth surprised him. It tasted nothing like the cold perfection served at his business dinners. For the first time in weeks, he felt something crack in his armor. The next morning, Emma joined him at breakfast without waiting for permission. She poured herself coffee and read a newspaper silently. It was a small rebellion, but Alexander noticed. When their eyes met briefly over the table, something unspoken passed between them. Neither acknowledged it, yet both felt it. Their fragile truce was tested when Alexander invited her to a high-profile boardroom luncheon. The board members, all older men in suits, eyed Emma with thinly veiled disdain. During the meeting, one man deliberately asked her a question about the company's finances. Expecting her to fumble, Emma straightened in her chair. "I do not know the financial breakdown," she admitted calmly. "But I do know that reputation is worth more than numbers. People follow leaders who stand for more than profit. That is what makes Alexander Kane impossible to replace." The room fell silent. Even Alexander was caught off guard. The board members shifted uncomfortably, unable to dismiss her answer. When the luncheon ended, Alexander did not comment. But as they walked out together, he said quietly, "You were not supposed to speak." Emma glanced at him, her expression steady. "Maybe not, but you needed someone to say it." That night, Alexander stood by his study window, looking out at the skyline. He replayed her words in his head. She had spoken with conviction, not to impress, but because she believed it. That authenticity was something money could not buy, something his world rarely offered. Meanwhile, Emma sat in her room, reflecting on the boardroom moment. She had not planned to defend him. It had come naturally, as if something inside her refused to let him stand alone. She reminded herself of the rules. 90 days, no feelings, no complications, but her heart whispered otherwise. The mansion no longer felt like a cage. It was becoming a stage where every shared glance, every unguarded word, revealed more than either of them intended. What began as a cold contract was slowly shifting. Beneath Alexander's rigid control and Emma's quiet defiance, tension simmered. It was not love, not yet. But it was dangerous enough to make both wonder if they could truly keep the promise of the 90-day agreement. And in the quiet hours, when the city slept and the mansion stood still, Alexander found himself listening for her footsteps in the hall, wondering why silence no longer felt like enough. The weeks passed, and what began as cold indifference had turned into an uneasy rhythm. Emma was no longer invisible in Alexander's world. She moved through the mansion with quiet dignity, leaving small traces of herself in places he had once considered sterile. A cup of coffee left on his desk before his morning meetings, fresh flowers arranged in the dining room, notes scribbled in the margins of newspapers that she left behind on purpose, as if to remind him that her voice existed. Alexander did not comment, but he noticed everything. He began to wait for the scent of her cooking in the kitchen, or the sound of her soft humming when she thought she was alone. The walls he had built for years did not crumble all at once, but hairline cracks had begun to form. One evening, the two of them were forced to attend a charity auction together. Emma wore a midnight blue gown chosen by Alexander's assistant. The dress hugged her frame, understated but elegant. When she stepped into the ballroom on his arm, the crowd turned. This time, instead of snickers, there was a ripple of surprise. She did not look like a contract bride. She looked like someone who belonged at his side. Throughout the night, Alexander kept his usual composure, but his eyes strayed to her more than once. Emma, feeling the weight of the stares, carried herself with poise. But during the auction, one of the guests made a cutting remark, suggesting she was nothing more than a prop. Emma's face flushed, but before she could respond, Alexander's voice cut through the air. "She is my wife," he said firmly, his tone like steel, "and I would appreciate it if she were treated with the respect she deserves." The room fell silent. Emma's breath caught. For the first time since their arrangement began, he had defended her not as part of an act, not for the cameras, but with conviction. The moment passed quickly, and Alexander returned to his usual cold exterior, but the damage was done. A seed had been planted. Back at the mansion that night, Emma lingered in the hallway, still shaken by his words. When Alexander passed by, she stopped him. "Why did you say that?" His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. Because it was true. Emma's heart pounded, but she turned away before he could see the confusion in her face. She reminded herself that it was a contract. 90 days, that was all. Yet the following days only blurred the lines further. Alexander began to ask about her life before the contract. At first, she answered cautiously, but his questions felt genuine. He listened when she spoke of working late shifts, of carrying her mother up narrow stairs when her illness worsened, of dreaming of a life where money did not dictate dignity. One night, she found herself laughing at one of his dry remarks. The sound surprised them both. For a fleeting moment, the mansion did not feel like a battlefield. It felt like home. But shadows still lingered. The board was growing suspicious. Whispers spread that their marriage was too sudden. too convenient. Victoria, the ex-fiancée, resurfaced with quiet threats and sharp smiles, watching for cracks to exploit. And Emma knew that when secrets surfaced, the fragile balance they had found could shatter. In the quiet of her room, she whispered to herself, "Do not forget, Emma, this is not real." Yet, as she remembered Alexander's voice at the auction, defending her with unshakable certainty, she realized that reality was no longer so simple. The contract was holding them together on paper, but in their hearts, something far stronger had already begun to stir, something neither of them had agreed to, something neither of them could control. The calendar pages turned, and Emma realized that nearly half of the 90 days had already slipped away. Each morning she reminded herself of the contract, of the money that would save her mother, of the promise that this was only temporary. Yet her heart betrayed her with every look, every word, every unexpected gesture that passed between her and Alexander. One rainy evening, Emma sat by the fireplace with a sketchbook resting on her lap. She had begun to draw again, something she had abandoned years ago when life became too heavy. The pencil moved across the paper, shaping the outline of a city skyline. She did not notice Alexander entering until his shadow fell across the page. "You draw," he said, his voice low with surprise. Emma glanced up, flustered. "It is nothing, just a way to keep myself from feeling like a stranger here." Alexander studied the sketch. His hand almost reached to touch the page, but he stopped himself. "You should not hide it. Talent should be seen." His words lingered in the air. For the first time, Emma sensed something in him that was not coldness, not control, but sincerity. She closed the book quickly, as if afraid the moment might mean too much. Days later, Alexander invited Emma to accompany him on a business trip to Boston. It was supposed to be another staged appearance, a chance to reassure investors of his stable personal life. Yet as they walked through the historic streets after his meetings, Emma found herself laughing at the sight of Alexander, struggling with an umbrella against the wind. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, yet he looked utterly human as he fought with the stubborn fabric. "You are not invincible, after all," Emma teased, her voice lighter than she expected. For a second, Alexander smiled, genuine, unguarded. It was the kind of smile that could unravel every wall she had built around her heart. That evening, at the hotel, the facade of the contract began to strain. Paparazzi spotted them entering the lobby, and reporters swarmed, demanding proof of their love. Without warning, Alexander pulled Emma close and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was meant to silence the crowd, to protect the image of their marriage. But the moment their lips met, the world seemed to vanish. The cameras, the flashing lights, the noise, all of it dissolved into silence. The kiss was supposed to be fake, yet it burned with something real. When they finally broke apart, Emma's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. Alexander's eyes locked onto hers, dark and unreadable, but no longer indifferent. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Back in the quiet of their suite, Emma confronted him. "You broke the rules, Alexander. The contract says no intimacy." His jaw tightened. "And do you regret it?" Emma hesitated. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "I do not know what I regret. I only know that it felt real." For the first time, Alexander did not have an answer. He turned away, but his silence betrayed more than words could. That night, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her lips still tingling from the kiss. She had promised herself that this marriage was only a performance, a 90-day illusion. But illusions did not leave her heart racing. Illusions did not make her wonder what his touch meant, or why his silence carried the weight of unspoken truth. The contract was written in ink, but the kiss had rewritten something deeper, something neither of them could control. And though both tried to ignore it, they knew the rules had been broken, and once broken, nothing would ever be the same. The morning after their return from Boston carried a silence heavier than usual. Emma avoided Alexander at breakfast, her eyes fixed on the cup of coffee in front of her while he buried himself in the financial section of the newspaper. Neither spoke of the kiss, but it lingered like electricity in the air, impossible to erase. Emma tried to distract herself with routine. She visited her mother at the hospital, sitting by her bedside, whispering stories of the grand mansion as if they were fairy tales. Her mother smiled faintly, unaware of the storm inside her daughter's heart. When Emma returned home that evening, she found Alexander waiting in the library. He stood by the window, his posture tense. "You were gone all day," he said. Emma's brows furrowed. "Is that against the contract?" Alexander turned, his eyes sharp. "That is not what I meant." For a moment they stared at each other, words unspoken, pressing between them. Emma's voice softened. "My mother is the reason I agreed to this. Do not forget that." Alexander looked as if he wanted to reply, but footsteps interrupted them. Victoria, his ex-fiancée, had entered uninvited. Her smile was poised, her eyes glittering with cruelty. "Still playing house, Alexander?" she asked mockingly. "Everyone knows this marriage is fake. Do you really think she can pass as your wife?" Emma stiffened, but Alexander stepped forward. "Leave, Victoria. This is not your home anymore." Victoria's laughter was sharp. "Not yet, but it will be, once the truth comes out. A contract bride? What a scandal that will be." When she finally swept out, the tension she left behind was suffocating. Emma's hands trembled, but she forced her chin high. "She is right, Alexander. The truth will destroy you." His reply came like steel. "Then we do not let it come out." The following days tested that resolve. Rumors began to circulate in business magazines, hinting that Alexander's sudden marriage was nothing but a stunt. Paparazzi followed them relentlessly, snapping photos of every move. At one public event, a reporter shouted, "Mr. Kane, is it true your wife was hired under contract?" Alexander tightened his grip on Emma's hand and guided her through the crowd without answering. Inside the car, Emma whispered, "They are starting to see through us." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Let them look. They will not find what they expect." Yet the pressure was mounting. That evening, Emma overheard members of the household staff whispering that wagers were being placed on how long the marriage would last. She retreated to her room, heart heavy. She told herself she could endure this for the remaining weeks. But when she touched her lips, she remembered the kiss, the moment when everything had felt painfully real. She whispered into the quiet room, "It was supposed to be pretend." But deep down, she knew pretending had already become impossible. The contract might still bind them, but their hearts were no longer following its rules. And with every passing day, the world outside was closing in, threatening to expose them before they had the courage to face the truth themselves. The storm arrived sooner than either of them expected. A tabloid released a headline that shook the city. "Millionaire CEO's marriage, a contract deal?" The article contained photographs, half-truths, and cruel speculation. Emma's face was splashed across the front page, labeled a gold digger. When Emma saw it, her hands trembled. She could endure whispers at parties, but this was different. Strangers in the street now pointed and laughed, calling her a fraud. She locked herself in her room, staring at the contract that had promised security but delivered humiliation. Alexander found her that night. He placed the newspaper on the desk, his expression dark. "I will handle this." Emma's voice cracked as she replied, "How? By reminding them that I am disposable, by hiding behind more lies?" He stepped closer, his tone sharper than ever. "You are not disposable." For a moment, the mask fell. His eyes revealed something raw, something vulnerable. But before she could reply, a phone call interrupted them. The board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. The marriage scandal threatened to drag down company stock. The next day, Alexander faced the board with Emma at his side. They accused him of recklessness, of endangering the company's image. One member sneered, "End this farce before it ruins us all." Emma expected Alexander to stay silent, to protect his empire. Instead, he rose from his chair, his voice ringing across the room. "This is not a farce. She is my wife. And if any of you believe otherwise, then perhaps you have forgotten that this company stands on integrity, not gossip." The room fell silent. Emma's heart pounded. In that moment, she realized Alexander was no longer protecting a contract. He was protecting her. The board recessed, unconvinced but shaken. As they left the building together, Emma whispered, "You risked everything." Alexander looked at her, his voice steady. "Some things are worth the risk." For the first time, Emma wondered if their marriage was no longer fake at all. The fallout from the board meeting spread quickly. News outlets speculated even louder. Paparazzi camped outside the mansion gates, and online voices tore Emma apart. She walked through the city with her hood pulled low, hearing cruel words hissed behind her back. Every insult cut deep. But what wounded her more was the thought that Alexander's empire might collapse because of her. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows, Emma confronted Alexander in his study. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice breaking. "End the contract now. Protect yourself before you lose everything." Alexander rose from his chair, eyes blazing. "Is that what you think? That I care more about the company than about you?" Emma froze, breath caught in her throat. He took a step closer. "At first, yes, this was about business. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being an act. I will not end this marriage because it is no longer fake to me." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "But the world will never accept me. I am not from your world, Alexander. I am a waitress from Queens." His voice softened, steady as a vow. "And that is exactly why you matter. You remind me of what is real." The next day, Alexander called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he stood before reporters with Emma at his side. Instead of denying the rumors, he faced them head-on. "Yes, this marriage began with a contract," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but then he turned to Emma, taking her hand. "What began on paper has become something no contract could ever define. I love her, and I will not apologize for it." The room erupted with chaos, reporters shouting questions. But Emma only heard his words, steady and undeniable. In that moment, the contract no longer mattered. The world knew their secret, yet for the first time, Emma felt free. Alexander had not just defended her. He had chosen her, in front of everyone. The confession at the press conference shook the city, but instead of destroying Alexander Kane, it changed the story completely. What the tabloids had painted as a scandal turned into something the public could not stop talking about. Newspapers that once called Emma a fraud now labeled her the woman who softened the ruthless millionaire. Business magazines debated whether his bold honesty was madness or genius. For the first time, Emma saw people on the street looking at her not with scorn, but with curiosity, even admiration. Yet despite the shift, Emma carried doubts in her heart. At night, she sat awake in her room, staring at the contract that had chained them together. The pages were worn now, folded and creased from being handled too many times. Soon the 90 days would be over. Would Alexander's words still stand once the clock ran out, or would she find herself alone again? One evening, as the city lights flickered through the tall windows of the mansion, Alexander entered quietly. He found her sitting by the fire with the contract in her hands. Without a word, he took it from her, glanced at the printed lines, and then tore it down the middle. The sound was sharp, final. Emma gasped. "Alexander, what are you doing?" He threw the pieces into the fire. Flames devoured the paper until nothing but ash remained. Then he turned to her, his expression steady, his voice firm. "This contract was a lie. What I feel for you is not. I do not want a bride bound by rules. I want a wife bound by love. Emma, stay with me, not for 90 days, but for a lifetime." Her eyes filled with tears. "Do you know what you are asking? I am not like the women from your world. They will never accept me." "Oh." Alexander stepped closer, his hand gently lifting her chin until their eyes met. "Let them talk. Let them judge. None of it matters. You are the only one I choose. You are the only one who matters." Emma's voice trembled. "And if I fail you?" He shook his head. "You could never fail me. You have already saved me, Emma. More than you know." The walls she had built around her heart finally crumbled. She whispered the words she had been too afraid to say. "Yes, I will stay." Weeks later, they stood side by side in front of family, friends, and a press that once doubted them. This time there was no contract, no performance, only truth. Emma wore a gown of her choosing, simple yet radiant, and Alexander looked at her with a tenderness that left no room for doubt. As he placed the ring on her finger, his voice carried across the room. "No rules, no signatures, no end date. Today, I vow forever." Applause filled the air, but Emma heard only the sound of her mother's quiet sobs of joy from the front row. The woman who had once sacrificed everything for her now lived to see her daughter cherished and chosen. Emma's journey had begun as desperation, a waitress signing away 90 days for money. It had become a spectacle of gossip and mockery. But it ended here, in a vow stronger than any contract. As Alexander kissed her, no cameras, no whispers, and no judgment could touch them. The world saw a millionaire and a waitress. But they knew the truth. They were simply two hearts that had chosen each other, against all odds, for a lifetime.